Every now and then, we encounter one of those moments where we wish time would just stop. They're so absolutely perfect that if we could dwell in them for all eternity, we'd be pretty content. Perhaps it's a lovely sunset on the beach with just the right person. Perhaps it's a dinner party where the food is good, the wine abundant, and the mix of people just right. You could talk about anything forever. For me, that place is the University of Notre Dame Environmental Research Center. Not because I'm a scientist, but because they let Holy Cross Religious go fishing there every summer. And there on Plum Lake, at 8:30, just as the sun is about to set, perhaps with a good cigar, and maybe after catching a few walleye, if we could pause the sun right there, it would be heaven. And so, we can understand Peter's instinct in today's gospel to capture this glorious moment where Jesus is transfigured in front of them with Moses and Elijah, to say, let us build 3 tents and let's stay here as long as we possibly can so we can soak it all up. Let's live this heavenly vision forever. And Jesus' response is not no, it's just not yet. It's not that Peter and James and John won't get that opportunity, they will, but in a little while. In this instance, in this moment, it needs to end. They need to return, to go back into the world, to live the journey of faith. You and I both know that we too can't stop time. We too can't make that dinner party last forever. We too can't make the sun stay in the sky as long as we would like. And we too, from those moments, though beautiful, we too must re-enter the world and go about our day-to-day life, monotonous as it might seem at times. And there are 2 options. The first is to be grumpy and crabby about it, that you can't make it last forever. That just makes us miserable people. The second option is the option of the disciples. To use those moments as nourishment to go back out into the world and live well and live rightly. It's actually the primary purpose of today's feast day. Today's feast day is not actually about Jesus. It's not about the cool party trick that he's able to perform on Mount Tabor. It's about the disciples. It's about us and the gift that God gives to us in these glimpses of the heavenly reality. It's noteworthy and important that the narrative of the Transfiguration in all the gospel accounts comes after Christ's prediction of the Passion and before his journey to Jerusalem. This moment comes right after Jesus has told Peter and James and John that the end that he and they will meet will be quite the gruesome end. And it comes right before they begin that pilgrimage to Calvary, where they will see their Lord mocked and scourged and crucified. One could only imagine if Peter and James and John thought of this moment as they saw their Lord held up in front of the crowds by Pilate and condemned to death. One could only imagine if they thought of this moment of glory as they saw Christ paraded through the streets like a common criminal. One could only imagine if they thought of this moment as they watched him die on the cross, and then huddled together in fear, wondering what it all meant. One can imagine that this moment for Peter and James and John would give them just a glimmer of hope that even in the darkest hour, even in that fear and confusion after the crucifixion, that the story might be just a little bigger than they could see or understand. One can imagine that this moment might have been one of the primary things that gave them just enough hope to not abandon all and to greet the Lord after the resurrection. And as it is for the disciples, so it is for us. No, Christ may not show up here with Moses and Elijah. We might not see his transfigured glory the same way that Peter and John and James did. But he does make his glorious reality present to us each and every time we gather around this altar to celebrate the Eucharist. Just like Peter and James and John on the Mount Tabor, we gather here to encounter the Lord in his fullness and in his glory, to be nourished and sustained by the foretaste of divine reality that awaits us at the end of all time. It's here, at Mass, at the Eucharist, that we, like the disciples, are nourished by the hope of the kingdom to come, so that we might go back out into the world and serve as his disciples, witnesses to the light and life and hope of Jesus Christ. That we as Christians are nourished here so that we can go out into the world, and where people say this is the end, we can say confidently, no, something greater awaits us. And so, friends, as we prepare ourselves to be nourished by the Eucharist this morning, perhaps the Lord is inviting us to think about how we might carry the grace of this encounter, like Peter and James and John, into our Christian pilgrimage, into those moments of darkness that we might encounter, into those people who we might encounter, who might be in the midst of despair, into those situations that seem completely without good or hope. We know that those situations can never be the end. Because here God gives us a foretaste of our true end, of his divine and eternal life, and reminds us that that is the glory that awaits us at the end of time. And that promise is what sustains and nourishes us throughout the pilgrimage of this Christian life, so that we might live as disciples of light and hope.